Assistant Commissioner, would you like to welcome us?
Good morning, all. First and foremost, I want to thank you all for attending this webinar this morning. The work you're doing out in the field supporting your districts are essential to the functionality of society and your local community. On behalf of Commissioner Repillette and Governor Murphy, we appreciate all that you're doing and your selfless service to the state of New Jersey. I would be remiss if I didn't take a moment to acknowledge the leadership of the Executive Director of NJPSA, Pat Wright, and her team for continuously partnering with NJDOE throughout this endeavor. I just want to make sure that you're taking time to go to the NJDOE's website and look at our FAQs. As you start to send requests up to us for answering questions for clarity, please take time to look at our FAQs. It's a printable document that you could look at for clarity. We're in real time in field services. We're here to support you. We're boots on the ground. We're in the community. So without further ado, I just wanted to thank you all for what you're doing. Next slide. So currently we have some partners here for Middletown School District to share some information on traumatic loss protocols. Thank you again for attending this webinar. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Commissioner, and thank you for to the New Jersey Department of Education Office of Preparedness and Emergency Planning and NJPSA for hosting this webinar. You know, during these uncertain times, it's really important to be able to have this opportunity to share and to learn from each other through our experiences. And I just want to take a moment to thank and recognize everybody that's, like the Commissioner said, boots on the ground and are dealing with these uncertain times. And, you know, these are uncharted waters. And every time a situation comes upon us, it's something that, you know, we haven't necessarily dealt with in a virtual environment before. So today, I have Tom Letson with me. He's one of our SACs in the high school in Middletown. My name is Pat Rinella. And, you know, we're just going to kind of share. Unfortunately, we had a traumatic situation over the weekend, and we had to react quickly, make sure resources were in place for our students and our staff. And we're just going to kind of share with you how we went about doing that in the virtual environment. And by no means are we experts on this, but it's something that we put together, and we just want to share. Hopefully you'll be able to get something from it, and together we'll be able to learn it and become better as an educational system. So this is kind of an overview of the 5 steps that we took as far as implementing this. Again, you know, brick and mortar, regular circumstances, we all have our crisis teams, we all have our protocols in place, and we know how to follow them. You know, in these situations where we're virtual and with the restrictions that have been put in place, it's not necessarily as easy. So, you know, if you look at the 5 steps, that's what I'm sure most of us have gone through, and we've utilized them. That's what we followed, and we tried when we created this this virtual crisis response. We tried to keep it as close to what it would look like as if we were able to access the building and be in the building and meet with these students and staff. So we really kind of, you know, just took that plan that we had in place and tried to modify it to make the best of the situation and meet the needs of the students in the virtual world.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Letson, I'm the Student Assistance Coordinator at Middletown South High School. As Mr. Rinella, I want to thank him for introducing me before. I want to thank everyone for having us today. I want to thank my district as well, Dr. George and Matt Kirkpatrick, our building principal, for allowing me to participate here today. I would like first to say that initially upon hearing this, I was a little uneasy on presenting because this was such a recent tragedy on Saturday morning, and it's still a fluid situation for us. However, you know, given the present circumstance, which is unprecedented, okay, with students being quarantined, and as Mr. Rinella alluded to, us not having access to our building, to, you know, develop a response where the kids could come to see us face to face. I felt like this was necessary to share with everyone how it works for us, and if something like this should happen to anyone else, that you know, maybe something that we did you could pick up on. So in regards to the incident of the sudden death, our law enforcement liaison communicated that incident to our building principal and central office immediately upon hearing that. You know, given this situation, we immediately knew that if this had been a normal circumstance, we would have been able to open our building and get to our building and set up a response where kids in crisis or emotional distress could come to the building and we could see them face to face. That not being the case, our building principal emailed all of our staff as soon as possible to inform them about the tragedy, thinking that students, because they couldn't come to the building, might start emailing, staff, or teaching staff, maybe some counselors, but we wanted everybody to know, okay, so they could direct the students back to the counseling staff. We also contacted Traumatic Loss Coalition in our county immediately to see in this situation what type of services they could potentially provide to us. They informed us that they weren't set up yet, but they definitely would be able to provide some services to us if necessary. Now, given this situation and the fact that we weren't able, okay, to physically see our kids, you know, we felt like they would be more likely to reach out to us, a familiar voice, and adults who they already established relationships with. So then at that point, we decided to mobilize and put our heads together and see what we could come up with. We can go to the next slide. Mr. Rinella?
So once we determined that we needed to mobilize our crisis team, these are kind of the steps that we went through, again, all virtual. And we were really, we were dealing with a circumstance where social media, was starting to have posts about the tragedy. People were becoming aware of it. And we wanted to make sure that we were there in a timely manner to be able to support the students and the staff. This was a situation where the student was a popular student and he had a large family. So there were connections throughout our community. It didn't necessarily only impact one school. We had 2 high schools in our district, but it impacted a number of schools, as he had some siblings that were in lower grades as well. So the first thing that we did was we had scheduled a Google meeting with our crisis team. Again, this is something that, is a normal procedure in situations like this, but virtually it becomes a little bit more difficult, although I'm sure many of you have participated in a number of Google Meets or Zoom meetings throughout these last couple of weeks. So we're getting pretty good at being able to participate in those meetings. One thing that we needed to do was identify a meeting facilitator because we had a lot of different members of the crisis team there, and we wanted to make sure that everybody had an opportunity to speak and ask questions and make sure that there was a comprehension of what was being discussed. So we identified one facilitator to kind of keep the flow of the meeting going, and that was very helpful throughout our meeting. During the meeting, actually, the principal took a moment and stepped away and had some time to communicate with the family because, like I had alluded to earlier, this was getting out on social media. So families and students knew about the tragedy. And if we were in the building, students knew where to go if they needed a resource. They knew they could go to the guidance counselor or their case manager or the students assistance coordinator. But this time of the virtual setting, we weren't there for them to come to us. So we needed to make sure that the community knew that we had resources available. So the principal spoke to the family. And again, this was relatively soon after the event, and the family was not comfortable, and we completely understood and sympathized sharing a lot of the information. So we decided to just put out a general email to the community to let them know, and we'll show you a copy of that email in a little bit, just to let them know that we did have resources available and how they could find us. During that meeting, really the meat and potatoes of that meeting was we were trying to develop what our virtual environment would look like. So we discussed a lot of different ways. Was it going to be through email? Was it going to be Google Hangouts where students could type back and forth? Was it going to be phone calls? Or were we going to try to set up, virtual meeting rooms? And that's ultimately what we decided. Our students all have access. We are a one-to-one district, so our students had access to devices to be able to contact counselors or make contact with counselors if they needed to. So we ended up deciding that we were going to create virtual meetings for our students if they wanted to access us. And then we also had to identify and assign the responsibilities of those members on the crisis team, exactly how that was going to look. And we'll get into more detail on the next slide.
Right. Okay. So, as far as this is a normal circumstance, when these things do happen, that we did identify a list of students that we felt would be impacted directly, and their guidance counselors went about contacting them immediately, okay, to ensure that they knew that they could reach out and talk to us. We were faced with a dilemma of how could the student body get in contact with us, because this was the weekend. Okay, so this was a Saturday morning, and we were faced with the weekend and having kids not being able to have direct contact to a staff member where they ordinarily would have on that particular day, as I alluded to previously, if the physical building could have been open and we could have been there. So we decided, okay, to create a central contact number for any student needing immediate assistance. We felt after doing a quick Google search that a number of the helplines were backlogged. They had posted messages on their site saying, please, we're experiencing high traffic. Please call back, or please hold, we'll be with you. So we felt that because of that, and because that the kids weren't able to see us physically, that we wanted to create the central contact number. We also arranged for counselors in this virtual environment, as soon as instruction was to start on Monday, that counselors were going to follow the students' virtual schedule and be in those Google Meetups and Google Hangouts during that class time to support any affected peers. When all this started to be arranged, okay, we had other groups in the crisis team working on the email that was going to be sent out to students and parents with the contact number and also other contacts with their guidance counselors, which they already had. So if we could check, if we could look at that email. Okay.
Oops. So this was our next slide.
Okay, so let's see. The email is supposed to be a part of that.
We may have, let me pull up the email. Sorry.
I think I can.
Not sure how to pull up the email. Let me.
Okay, I have a copy here. I can read it.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's the next slide.
I'm gonna go ahead and read it. I have a copy here. It's okay.
Well, I'll fight forward.
Why don't you read the email?
Sure. Okay. So the email said, "Dear South Community, the following counseling services are available to students and parents. Our student assistance counselor, Mr. Letson, will be available for phone calls via Google Voice today, March 28th until 9 p.m. and tomorrow, March 29th from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. The phone number is 732-858-6599. If this number is busy, please call back or call or text the New Jersey second floor helpline at 888-222-2228 or use the crisis text line by texting HOME to 741-741. After 9 p.m., please call or text the second floor helpline or the crisis text line, which are 24/7 services. Please call 911 if it's an emergency. Counselors will be available Monday through Friday during school hours on Google Hangout. You can sign up to meet with your counselor through the following links. Please email your counselor for non-emergent issues. Okay, so that was the email that went out. As Mr. Rinella had alluded to previously, it was a general email out of respect to the family, and we did get some responses to that. And we'll go to, let's see. Okay.
So real quick, I just want to jump in and,
Yep.
implementing this plan. And when during that meeting, when we were discussing exactly what the platform would look like as far as resources for the students, the thing that really kind of stuck with us, and Traumatic Loss Coalition was great, and they were there for any type of support that we needed. But in times like this, especially with the social isolation that's going on with COVID-19, we really felt that to best serve our students, it would be most beneficial if they were able to speak to somebody that they've already created a relationship with. And that was really the reason why, we felt strongly that we needed to put something in place rather, to be a resource for our students, and not to just provide numbers. Those services would be great and outstanding, but we really felt strongly that we needed to be there. And if students were in need, they needed to be able to contact somebody that they've created that relationship with, and be able to have that FaceTime with them and really understand exactly what they're going through.
Okay, so we just want, if we can go to the previous slide just for a second. Okay, so just to let everyone know, you may know this already, but we did create that central number with Google Voice, and it was very easy. We did just decide to have that phone line monitored for 12-hour part of the day, to have it available to our students, as the notification of this tragedy came out. Guidance counselors created appointment slots through their Google Meet, and our teaching staff were advised to notify counselors of any students that were communicating difficulty. So we did feel that even though we were all in our own homes, that we had come together and established a plan that was going to work. Okay, we can go to the next slide.
And then, normal operating procedures always have debriefing opportunities. So we debriefed on a regular basis, actually, pretty much not hourly, but midday and at the end of the day on Saturday and Sunday, just to kind of review what took place at that time. The one thing, we felt it was very important to have that line that was being monitored from 9 o'clock in the morning till 9 o'clock at night. We did not have a tremendous amount of student involvement on that line, but we did feel it was necessary to have that. And if we were ever to go through this situation again, I think we would also make that available, just because that's an immediate way for someone to hear a familiar voice or be directed to a familiar voice. And we reviewed it again yesterday at the end of the day, because as this tragedy, as more information is coming to light, we're finding that more people may have been affected by it. So the daily debriefing is very important, and we continue, like I said, each day, find out a little bit more information, and then we go and we provide the supports necessary to those students.
And as we're talking now, it's still a fluid situation, and the quarantine that we find ourselves in is presenting very unique scenarios to us. Students are reaching out to us, and parents. Students are in their homes, and they feel like they want to do something in response to this, and they have this energy, and they want to feel like they can do something or do something for the family. And memorializing is something that schools have to be very careful with, and I know probably everyone listening here does understand that. And we are looking at ways, okay, that we may be able to help the students process this in a way that they felt like they contributed something. So we're looking at a couple of ways virtually to do that. It's in the approval process right now. Something I would also just let everyone know is that when we're we're out of the physical building and everyone's in their homes. In retrospect, looking back at social media and monitoring that in regards to, people in the community or even staff members that are putting positive stuff up on social media, but we might have wanted a discussion with that first, before it did go on. Mr. Rinella, you have anything else?
No, I just, again, want to thank the DOE and NJPSA and everybody that's listening for this opportunity. Here's our contact information. If you want to get in contact with us, we'd be happy to communicate back and forth. And I wish everyone the best, stay healthy. And again, thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Patrick and Tom. That's incredible information that will be extremely useful to districts across the state. So I'm sure that others will benefit, and we will post a link to this full PowerPoint and to that email that was referenced as well. So everyone will have access to that information. My name is David Nash. I run the Legal One program here at the Foundation for Educational Administration. And the piece that I would like to help folks focus on is addressing issues of student confidentiality and addressing HIB claims in the environment that we're all dealing with today. Of course, as I go through my presentation, I always do like to remind individuals that I'm trying to give you the best information we have on a whole range of legal issues. Of course, it is not legal advice, and we always encourage folks to reach out to your school attorney to talk about issues particular to your school district. The New Jersey Principals and Supervisors Association, our umbrella organization, and our Foundation for Educational Administration, we've recognized the need to provide ongoing support to the field. We are thrilled to be able to partner with the New Jersey Department of Education and to offer today's webinar, and we are looking to offer additional webinars in partnership with the department. We are also offering a number of other free sessions that we want to make sure individuals are aware of. We have a free webinar tomorrow on meeting the needs of special education students. We have a free webinar on Thursday that will go into much more detail than I'm able to today on addressing HIB and discrimination claims. We're doing a free webinar in partnership with the New Jersey School Counselors Association on Monday on addressing student mental health and counseling needs that will build on some of what we have talked about today and are talking about. And we tentatively have plans to do a free webinar to provide guidance to the field on the observation and evaluation issue in partnership with the Department of Education. Tentatively, it is not yet finalized. We are looking at potentially doing that this Friday at 10:30 a.m. We'll have information out shortly on that. And we're also tentatively looking at another free webinar next Tuesday, April 7th, to help school districts understand the application of FERPA in today's environment as we're dealing with a whole range of remote services. I won't go through these one by one, but we're also offering a number of free Zoom workshops that provide a little more in-depth information for folks in the field on a whole range of issues to help understand best practices when it comes to remote instruction and remote outreach and thinking systemically through the very challenging issues we have today.
That's why Corey loves to be feeding his ass all the time.
Assistant Commissioner, we are able to hear your comments as we're speaking.
Yeah, I hear you.
So our Assistant Commissioner could silence his mic. That would be great. So a few quick key topics that I'll walk through with you in this short period of time: understanding FERPA, remote counseling and instruction, responding to emergent issues, and some available resources. So first, understanding FERPA. The U.S. Department of Education is obviously very sensitive to the challenges that we're all going through and has put out a new guidance document. It's a very useful one-page document with a number of links that address various aspects of student confidentiality, student records, and the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. And I am finding across the state that there is some significant misunderstanding of FERPA and student confidentiality. We should not in any way be looking at FERPA as something that prevents us from reaching out to our students virtually. Whether it is a classroom discussion, we absolutely have the ability to do virtual classrooms where we can see multiple students, and multiple students can see each other during that particular classroom discussion. It is not a violation of FERPA for someone to actually be observing a virtual classroom. So if there is somebody else in that household who is able to see that virtual classroom discussion, that is not a violation of FERPA, as long as the teacher leading that discussion is not disclosing personal information about particular students who are part of that classroom discussion and is focused on the curriculum. Remote counseling is also permissible, and we're going to go through this issue in some detail at our free webinar that we're offering on April 6th. But we have students who absolutely need ongoing counseling, students that we have previously identified and have been providing ongoing support. And there's no reason for that counseling to end because of the remote environment that we are working in today. We will walk through in some detail on Monday some of the protocols that districts should have in place, but we absolutely should be continuing to provide remote counseling. Recording virtual sessions could create potential legal issues with FERPA. So in many instances, it is not necessary to record a classroom discussion that is going on or to record another interaction that we're having with a student. Once we record that session and it's educationally relevant, it does become subject to FERPA's obligations and restrictions and the importance of keeping that information confidential. So we want to think through whether it's really necessary for us to specifically capture and record that ongoing conversation. We do need to be aware, if we think about the various technologies that are used in school districts across the state, we are using so many different providers for online services. When we do that, we have to make sure that those providers understand if they are receiving specific personally identifiable information about students, that they in turn have a duty not to disclose that information. And each of your school districts should be entering into service agreements with various online providers where they specifically agree not to disclose personally identifiable information regarding students. Again, it is not an insurmountable challenge. Those agreements do exist. We give you a link to the U.S. Department of Ed guidance that gives you information on what those agreements should provide. But it's important that we have those agreements. And we have incredible teachers, incredible counselors, incredible administrators across this state who are very technologically savvy. But as we are identifying new apps to use that could be very helpful with students, as we're exploring various social media sites, as we're exploring other technologies, it's critical that they all be pre-approved and vetted and screened by the school district. If we have a well-intentioned teacher using a certain app or a certain site or a certain technology that has not been pre-approved, that's where we might run into challenges with FERPA. So I mentioned the importance of proactively supporting our students. We have all in our districts identified at-risk student populations, and it's very important that we be proactive at addressing those students who we previously identified as students who might be at risk for various reasons. And there is a whole range of reasons, of course, that we have students who may be struggling. We may know of some students who are struggling with various mental health issues, with substance abuse issues, with potentially issues in the home environment, abuse issues that could have occurred. We should not be passively sitting back and waiting for a student or a parent to reach out to us for assistance when we do know there are certain students who need ongoing support. So one of the things that we urge districts to do is to think about individualized support plans where appropriate for students who we have already identified. And of course, we have to recognize that given the stresses and challenges of this environment, there are going to be many more students who need support because of the challenges that we're going through. So we have to be ready to adapt existing crisis response plans to the current situation. You just heard a great example of that in walking through how to adapt those plans to the current environment. Every district should be having that conversation, because I know that all of your districts have in place crisis response plans, but they need to be applied very differently given the current situation. And we should be actively thinking through how do we utilize all available internal and external resources. So when it comes to addressing issues of harassment, intimidation, or bullying, we've received many questions on that particular issue. First, let me stress that the statutory requirement to address HIV claims is in full force. We are in a situation now where we have virtual instruction happening in classrooms in school districts across this state. So if we learn about a harassment, intimidation, or bullying issue, most likely a cyberbullying issue, but it could be something that we learn about that happens physically between two students. But if we learn about a new issue, we do have a legal obligation for an anti-bullying specialist to conduct an investigation of that issue. If we learn about if we had previously learned about an issue prior to the statewide school closure, there is still an obligation to investigate that issue as well. We know that there could be new issues involving potential stigmatizing of students, unfortunately linked to the coronavirus. We have seen examples of students being stigmatized based on country of origin and misperceptions of the origins of coronavirus, and blaming students based on their background or their family or their race or ethnicity or nationality. And obviously those are very serious issues that need to be addressed. When we first had the closure of schools, of course, none of us was sure how long this would last. It's becoming clear that this is going to extend for some period of time. We still don't know how long, but it looks like we are entering a period where we're going to have to accept that we will need to do some remote investigations, as challenging as that is, given the likelihood of an extended school closure and the need for us to protect our students, even in this remote environment. So we have to think about various strategies for doing effective investigations and getting to the truth. It's more difficult. It's more difficult than it would be in person, when an anti-bullying specialist can sit down with a student and be able to more effectively, potentially, assess the credibility of that student. So we will walk through in our webinar on Thursday specific strategies to help you think through how to get to the truth, how to do an effective investigation, how to write the reports that we are going to have to write, just as we would for issues of HIV prior to the school closure. So keep in mind that if we have an HIV incident and you are engaging in due diligence and trying to interview all of the key players, and it becomes impossible despite all your best efforts, the school district still needs to submit a report, and that report still needs to be given to the superintendent and reported to your local Board of Education. And that report may say that we're unable to reach a conclusion at this time and give the specific reason that despite our best efforts, we have not been able to get a statement from this critical witness or this critical alleged participant in an incident. And perhaps it's a student who is unable to even speak on the phone, given the nature of what's going on now. So we need to clearly identify that and identify that this report will be amended at a later date when we are able to gather that critical information. We wanted to just give you some useful links. We know that everybody is looking for the latest information. So at NJPSA and FEA, we are constantly updating information, and we give you a link to lots of great resources to help you as you address these issues. We also give you the wonderful link from the New Jersey Department of Education. There are just a wealth of resources available from the U.S. Department of Education as well, from the CDC, and from the New Jersey Department of Health. We also wanted to just spend a moment reinforcing some of what you've already heard about the Traumatic Loss Coalition. There are a network of traumatic loss coalitions that are established in every county in the state of New Jersey. This is an incredible program overseen by Rutgers University Behavioral Healthcare. We give you a link to their website with additional information. You should know, and many folks do, that every county has a county coordinator for the Traumatic Loss Coalition, has a lead response team, has that coalition that is working very well in counties across the state. There's a central team that plans programs, provides training and technical assistance. We give you the specific phone number as well for the Traumatic Loss Coalition to hopefully make sure you're getting the information and the support that you need. And the Traumatic Loss Coalition has been a great partner with us. They promote best practices in suicide prevention, as well as trauma understanding and trauma response assistance to schools. And of course, in these unprecedented times, the Traumatic Loss Coalition can consult and offer schools virtual psychological first aid for staff and students. So we know how strained everybody's resources are, and we urge you to take advantage of the great resources they have available across the state. Finally, additional TLC services. We wanted to make sure folks were aware of the wide range of services that are available through the Traumatic Loss Coalition. With that, I will turn it over to Jeff Gale, the Director of the Office of School Preparedness and Emergency Planning.
Thanks, Dave, and thanks for your partnership. Thanks for working with us week to week on this. Your platform has been very helpful. And I guess everybody must really be sitting home bored because we've got over 1,600 people on this call, the number I'm looking at. So thanks to everybody out there for working as hard as you have been. Thanks for all your support of our office. We want to, with this presentation, give you a little bit of an update of what we're seeing out in the field and talk about a couple new issues. But the food delivery remains one of the biggest, the meal distribution remains one of our biggest topics right now, and that's what most of my team is out constantly doing on a day-to-day basis. So in the last 2.5 weeks, we've visited 16 different counties, 78 school districts, and 134 individual schools to watch their distribution processes. That includes about 6 off-site non-school distribution sites, such as churches, municipal lots, and so forth, and also a half a dozen bus delivery routes where we've got some districts actually loading up the food supplies and getting them out to the individual, in some cases, homes, in other cases, delivering to points along a typical bus stop route or something along those lines. Next. What we've been seeing. Really want to talk about what we've been seeing out there because, what we're observing out in the field, none of us are experts on, right? We haven't gotten to a point where this is a standard practice. This isn't something we've had to engage in before at this level. So the reason for our observations is, number one, to make sure that if anybody's struggling out there, that we have the availability as a resource to help you, but we can't do that without as much information as we can get. So on a day-to-day basis, our observations essentially consist of driving by, watching what's going on, touching base if we can with somebody at the district to let them know that, hey, we're out here. What's been working for you? What have you been seeing in the way of people showing up for meals, struggles that you're seeing, or things that you're doing that you think are working really well? This will be a good time for me to point out that everything that we're doing is simply in the form of support. I think everyone out there knows what the footprint of our office is and the nature of the services that we deliver. And you all know, I hope, that we are not a compliance office. We do not get involved in looking for things that are quote unquote wrong or incorrect and making sure that they get quote unquote corrected. We're out there to see what we can do to help elevate everyone without any type of compliance or oversight. So Please don't confuse these visits with that. There's been some concern from the Ag Department that there's a belief that there's some compliance going on out there in the food delivery. The Ag Department is not out on compliance missions, and neither are we on their behalf. So anything that you have in the way of a question about the actual food delivery, with regard to the substance of the meals, the frequency of the deliveries and so forth, please know that the New Jersey Department of Agriculture Food and Nutrition Division controls all of that information, and they are the ones to go to if you have questions about that. Our footprint in this is only safety and security and trying to make sure that things are expedited in a way that gets as many meals out as we can, as safely as we can. Next. So the distribution, and there's a couple typical tables that we see inside with the food preparers. We're going to talk a little bit about what we're seeing from that point forward. Those are where most of our concerns that we've seen have arisen. Next. So the biggest, far and away, is insufficient social distancing at these distribution sites. We're finding people standing in line, shoulder to shoulder, engaged in conversation like they're waiting to see the next movie. They're mingling, they're socializing. We all know that we're not getting out much, right? We don't see the people we're typically used to seeing. And so people are always in that hurry to get to the front of the line and complete their mission. And we are seeing people on top of one another during this process, which is the whole thing we're trying to avoid by taking our kids out of school. So one of our biggest concerns starts right there as we pull up to a site and we see people all lined up and standing on top of each other. We're also seeing what seems to us like an overuse of distribution points inside the building. Again, we're trying to make sure that we keep people apart. We're trying to take advantage of the fact that the aerosols and the aerosol carrying of the virus is quickly dispersed. That's much better done outside than it is inside. Once you start bringing people into your buildings, you're putting them in close quarters with one another, with your food service people, and the potential for contaminating your building obviously is much increased. So we're encouraging that we get meals delivered outside as much as we possibly can. Another issue that we're running into is the aggregating of food and the meals on one table. And so imagine pulling up to a site as a parent and seeing somebody walk up and sneeze or cough somewhere near a table full of meals, not knowing which one you're going to be picking up when you get to the table. We know that these contaminants of the virus can last for hours, if not days, on different types of material. Plastic is obviously one of the ones that it lasts longest on. So what we don't want to do is expose all the meals to one potentially ill person. So drawing all these people to one common location and making that a possibility is something that we're trying to encourage avoiding at all costs. Next. Non-contact delivery methods. We're seeing people handing off meals. I don't believe that from what we've seen out in the field that this is necessary, but for some reason it seems to be very common. The closer we get to people while we're handing off meals, the greater the risk that we're going to expose one of those two people to somebody who might be ill. And, you know, they tell two friends and so on, right? So handing those meals off into a vehicle or at a table definitely increases our risk of exposure. So those are really some of the biggest. We are seeing at most of our sites crossing guards, but not at all of our sites. We do have to remain cognizant of the fact that people are walking up to our buildings if we're delivering on site, and we need to make sure that we get them there safely, especially if it's a child with no guardian. And that also attaches to what we're seeing in the way of a lack of security or law enforcement at these sites. I think we all know we'd feel much better if somebody was there with a law enforcement presence, if at all possible, during these delivery hours. One of the next things that we're running into is definitely a low turnout for these meals. So please, if you're experiencing this, try to make sure that you take a look, query your community, look on your social media and see what people have to say about your delivery process. Are they aware? Is your messaging sufficient? Are you putting it out in multiple languages? Are you using more than one means of communication? Are the means that you're using something that people are familiar with? Are they able to find your location of delivery once they get to your site? We've seen people scrambling around trying to figure out if they're supposed to go in the building, not knowing where the food is. And then the starting times. One thing that seems to be prevalent is that an early start time tends to result in a little bit lesser of a turnout. People are not getting up at the same hour they used to. Kids definitely aren't. And so take a look at your start time. And maybe after we've been doing this for a couple weeks, you might want to query your community of recipients and find out what's working and what's not, so that you can hone for your own neighborhood, your own population. Next. So those are a couple of things we just talked about. Also, distributing by van or bus to condensed or low income areas. That seems to be working for some schools. When we do this, the bus should have multiple drop-off locations and remain there for 20 to 25 minutes. 10 minutes, we all know somebody's going to get there in 11, right? So try to make sure we're on that site for a sufficient amount of time to make sure that everybody gets a chance to get to the bus. The food distribution site should be communicated to all residents of your district. And we ran into this last week. That's a Sayreville bus that you're looking at there, and they were using that bus for delivering their meals. And that process seemed to be working very well for them. Next. Communication, again, let's go back to making sure that everybody knows exactly what we're doing, how we're doing it, and where we're doing it. So exercise the use of that social media, your emails, your multilingual concerns, but always try to make sure that you're definitely using what people are used to in your existing robocalls or email chain or whatever it is that you typically would notify people for a school closure, for snow, or for some major event. Next. Here's the big one. And so here's one method, good signage as a reminder, a gentle reminder to people that we need to keep our distance while we're doing this. Next. We saw this slide last week, and shout out to Nicole Moore down in Chemung. Apparently she realized that we didn't know how to spell distancing, so we got that corrected. And there's just an example, and you might have seen this if you've been in a local CVS. They seem to be using this. They're marking the floor with tape 6 feet apart. These maybe it could be a little bit further apart what I'm looking at here, but we are finding that these things do help people to remember to not encroach on the person that's in front or behind them. Next. So a couple different delivery methods. Walking up to the building. So obviously we're going to use a closed parking lot or schoolyard, some other safe location if it's off-site, where people are going to walk up to that meal distribution site. What we like to see is from a bit of a distance, the number of meals gets communicated to somebody who's at a table located away from them with meals. Once we have that number communicated to that individual, they relay that to the distribution staff. The distribution staff retrieves that specific number of meal or meals from the larger table, walks up and places it on the receiving table, and then that staffer steps away to give space, at which point the recipient then approaches the table and picks up the meal or meals and walks away. And we continue to repeat that process, periodically wiping the table in between. This is something that Tom and I worked on with Matawan the other day. We set up a site, and this is something that we propose might be useful to some of your districts out there. This would represent a walk-up situation, using the bus as the distribution point, almost like Tom keeps talking about ice cream trucks, so we kind of built our own, right? We've got some tape markings that you see on the right at 6-foot intervals on the sidewalk, and then as you approach the bus, a series of cones, each of one says, please wait here, so that everybody continues to move along that queue. Next. As they move towards the bus, the recipient that's about to receive their meal steps up to the bus window. They announce the number of meals that they're there to pick up. The person records the number of meals that are now going to be distributed to that individual and notifies the individual standing at the back of the bus, the food handler or staffer at the back of the bus, how many meals are going to be picked up. At which point, that staffer at the rear of the bus puts that appropriate number of meals out on the table that you see off to the right rear of the bus. Next. That allows that patron time after making the announcement to the recorder at the window. It allows enough time for the meal to get on the table, for the staffer to get back away from that table, and for that person to walk the length of the bus, step up to the table, retrieve the specific meal or meals that they're there for, and then depart. Next. And you can see that table as it's situated gives that operator at the back of the bus with the meals an opportunity to retrieve meals from the back of the bus, place them on the table, and then step away. Next. So with that process, we're keeping the meals in the bus. We're keeping them away from people so that they're not sneezing or coughing on any meals. They're not handling or contacting any meals other than the ones that they're walking away with. And we're keeping the people that are handling the food away from the people that are receiving the food. You can use that with a drive-up process as well by reversing the bus so that the driver's side is now facing the pavement rather than the sidewalk, if that makes sense to you. And you could use that same exact process in reverse. So drive and drop will be the next option. We again are going to close the lot or the schoolyard at that point and make sure that we keep people away from that bus with traffic. And from a distance, again, we're going to communicate the number of meals to that staffer who's at the table. The meals are going to be moved to that distribution table. The staffer is going to step away, and then our recipients move up to the table, retrieve the meals, and depart. That could be in a drive up with or without a bus. If we simply, I guess we move to the next slide. You saw this last week. This is an overhead view of a site down in South Jersey that's using this method without the bus. You can see the traffic pattern pulling up. You can see the stop mark where the vehicle comes to a stop. The tables are represented by the white rectangles. Those are clear, empty tables, and they only receive the number of meals that that person driving up to that site is going to receive. Next. This is what it looks like on the ground. You can see up on the deck, up by the building, is where the meals are kept, and they're shuttled out to that distribution table as the individual pulls up and announces how many meals they're there for. Next. And there is the individual standing, waiting for the meal to be placed on the table by the individual that's up by the building, the staffer up on the left. They record the meal, they bring it down, they drop it on the table, they retreat back to the building, and then the individual at the vehicle proceeds up to the table and picks up the meals and departs. Next. So, if you can't do some of this, you can consider placing a table at the driver's side. You can use the same exact process. The driver stops at the first staff location, announces the meals. That gets relayed from one staffer to the next, who brings those meals up to the table, and the driver just simply pulls up next to the table, retrieves the meals, and advances and departs. Next. If the meals have to be placed in the vehicle for some reason, and I would avoid this if I possibly could, consider having the driver open the trunk and just place the meals in the trunk and let that vehicle depart. What we don't want what we don't want to see is this. This seems simple, but I can tell you from 13 years of patrolling the New Jersey Turnpike, exactly what happens when a vehicle pulls up and you walk up to that vehicle and they open the window. As soon as you experience this in that context, you'll understand. The air pressure that changes forces all the air in that vehicle out into the face of the person standing at the window, at the same time that it is drawing air into the vehicle from the direction of the person that's standing outside handing the meals in. You have a very closed environment in that vehicle with potentially aerosolized viral contaminants that are going to flood out that window directly into that woman's face as soon as that window gets opened. So think about that if this is what we're doing. We want to try to avoid this. We're seeing this far too much, and believe that there's a safer way to do this without contact, without exposing people to cross-contamination of aerosolized viral contaminants. Never thought I'd be saying those words to this group of people, but here we are. So next, the safe food handling. Again, we're not the USDA. We're not the Food and Drug Administration. I'm not here to tell you exactly what good food safety and hygiene is. The protocols are out there. They should be adhered to. What we do see, for the most part, are people trying to use masks wherever they can. Do some research. I'm hearing mixed messages now about the use of gloves. What people do fail to recognize is that gloves can hold that virus probably longer than skin. And if those gloves aren't clean, it doesn't matter whether we touch our face with a glove or a hand, it's exactly the same, right? So what we want to do is make sure that we're handling the food safely. We're doing everything we can to minimize. Sometimes the gloves might need to be, we might use some hand sanitizer on the gloves, especially when we take them off. If we believe that we need to change our gloves, potentially using a little bit of hand sanitizer on the gloves before removing them removes the contaminant from the gloves, and lessens the chance that we touch it with our bare skin as we take those gloves off. Next. And again, our workers, if they exhibit any symptoms, if they state that they're feeling ill, if they display that they're feeling ill, we don't want them to be near our food. So please encourage them to let people know how they're feeling. And if they have any perceived health issues, to please let someone in their chain know, because we really don't want sick people handling the food at this point. Next. Technology. We're going to kind of move on and talk about this. And it looks as though, you know, more and more we're queuing people up for the purpose of handing out technology. I know in Ocean County, this was a problem that was in the media about a week ago. If you think people are anxious to get a student school meal off of a table, imagine how anxious they are to make sure that they don't miss out on a laptop. And so we see the same potential for crowding. We see the same potential for people being anxious and lining up. And we want to make sure that we practice some of these same techniques when we're handing out our technology. Next. So one thing we need to do is for ourselves, right, as the districts, we want to keep track of what we're giving to who. So completing our agreements and our forms online rather than standing in line and doing it in person is something that will expedite this system. Tom recently worked with a district in Monmouth County, and this was the practice that they were using. Please fill out the form online so that we don't have to worry about exchanging paperwork. Next. What they're using in this particular case is a QR code posted where you would have the next recipient for a piece of equipment stepping up to receive theirs. They scan the QR code. That form is then accessed. The code ends up being scanned and put into the database, and now we know exactly who is picking up what as they move forward and retrieve their equipment. We're going to get you some more information out on this, but this is courtesy of the Keyport School District that was using the QR code to make sure that people could step up, register for their device, and then move ahead and pick one up without having to come in the building, hand off paperwork, and so forth, wherever possible. Next. Your school itself, and we're going to keep this pretty brief because for the most part, we don't have too many people in our buildings, but we want to talk about how we're keeping our schools safe because we do have some people that are essential in and out of our buildings. Next. Again, we want to have some social distancing be our guide here. We want to make sure that anybody that has to be in the building, that we enforce the distancing, that we remind people regularly about keeping their distance, that we regularly disinfect the surfaces that we're coming into contact with. I would encourage, my mother works in an office with a residential community, and they're staffing that office to take phone calls for issues that the residents might need to have addressed. They're staffing it one individual at a time. And I encouraged her with something she didn't think about. It's always good to make your mother realize that you're brilliant. I said, Mom, why don't you use the speakerphone? Don't pick up the phone. You don't know who's used it last, right? So some simple things, keeping our area clean, using a speakerphone rather than picking up a handset wherever we can. Making sure that we wipe everything down when we get there, wipe everything down before we leave, avoiding assigning more than one person to a room or office at any given time. And then again, reminding them to keep their distance. Some simple things that we can do to try to keep the people safe that we have to keep bringing back into that building. Next. Our playgrounds, our football and track fields, our recreation properties, we should be thinking about closing these things, right? The last thing we want is to tell our kids that they can't come to school and then see 30 of them out on the playground all together. That's what we're trying to avoid. We know that our community members are also potentially going to take advantage of these facilities, and we're trying to keep people apart. So where you can, when you can, you should give some consideration to not opening these things up for use during this pandemic. Next. And then so far, so thank you to the schools that have volunteered. We talked about the process for the personal protective equipment and giving up anything that you might have that you don't immediately need to your county OEM offices. If anybody's running into any problems connecting, what we did was We put all of your information out for those who volunteered, your contact information, the amount of and number of materials or items that you might have to, that you're willing to part with. And those OEM coordinators are supposed to be reaching out, making contact with you, and arranging to pick up those items wherever possible. Please keep receipts for yourselves. My original hope and desire at the beginning of this was to get an assurance that you'd be resupplied or compensated on the back end of this. I was unable to get anybody to do that. However, I have been given verbal assurances that so long as we keep receipts, we should have a pretty good chance later on of saying, hey, this is what I handed off. I'd really like to get some of these materials back because we do need them. So please, please, please try to get receipts for anything that you hand off. And please, please, please email those, scan a copy of that receipt to me. I am keeping a central repository for anybody that sends me a receipt so that I can show who has donated what to this effort. Thank you. Next. Next. Pretty please, next.
I'm trying to.
I know. Resources, so we're going to give you a couple resource pages, and remember that this is going to be put out. Again, the link will be put out for anybody that needs to reuse it, and we will make sure that these resource links get to you in a usable form. But a couple of the resources that we want to make sure that you have access to are here, as far as addressing student mental health, talking about this crisis. One of the things that we're concerned about at this point is, you know, what types of activities are going on in the absence of intense supervision that typically takes place in the school, and what environment does that create? Are we having kids sitting home that are anxious? Are we having kids that are sitting home bored and have nothing better to do? We want to make sure that we've got some counseling available as to how to deal with those types of situations. So here are a couple resources here, and then again, a raft of different resources for your community, from your community locally, from the state level. Some hotlines also available for call-ins. Most of these are at this point being staffed pretty much around the clock as far as the call-ins. So we want to make sure we take advantage of this, and at least that we get it out to you. Next. And one more. Again, we'll make sure that you are able to open up something and click on these things and take them where they direct you. Next. Because all we have are links now. The USDA
we will make sure that all those PowerPoints are available
right
as well.
Right, we'll get all that stuff out to everybody moving forward. So I think that's probably the last slide. I could be wrong. Next. Okay, and so there's the last. Anything that you have from my office, please send through this link, through this email address. We'll make sure that we find a way to get back to you with answers. I neglected to say this last time, and I promised myself I wouldn't forget this time. For the school safety specialists that are out there, please send me an email that you have seen this presentation, and we will credit you for an hour of your time towards your continuing education hours. I appreciate all of you and your efforts out there. We've got a pretty good cross section of our school community that's on these on a regular basis. We're going to try to continue them. If anybody has topics that they think they want addressed, please let us know what they are, and we'll try to work something in subsequent conversations through these webinars. But I think at this point, we're going to try to continue moving forward with some regularity with these things, and try to give you some new and updated information in other areas that are impacting our schools due to these closures. So let us know what those things might be, and we'll make sure we get some examples and some experts and some people that can talk about solving some of these issues that you're being confronted with. So thanks for your time. Please do all you can to stay safe. Please do all you can to stay away from everybody. I keep telling my wife she needs to stay downstairs and I need to stay upstairs, and she thinks it's personal. I'm trying to explain it's not. I'm just trying to model the behavior we're asking for. So it's reduced the fights in my house. It's great. So anyway, thank you all for your time. In all sincerity, we really appreciate your support of our office. We really support your input from out in the field. We've gotten some great ideas from everybody out there. And the more that we can share and pass these things along, I think the stronger we all become. So thanks, and let us know what else we can do to help you.
Thank you very much. We at NJPSA and FEA really appreciate our partnership with the department, and we're very happy to help get information that's so critical out to the field. So thanks so much for working so closely with us to get this information out.